The Philippines goes to the polls, and the politician dubbed the Donald Trump of the East is tipped to be president. How has voter dissatisfaction turned Filipino politics on its head? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Filipinos have voted in elections that are set to have a profound impact on their future. The politician tipped to be president is Rodrigo Duterte, a maverick mayor and self-confessed killer who's known as the Punisher. His critics fear he'll return the Philippines to dictatorship. His supporters say he's a man of action who will tackle three big voter concerns: crime, corruption and inequality. So lots for us to discuss today. But first, Al Jazeera's Margot Ortigas sets things up from Manila.
Polling centers opened at dawn across the Philippines to accommodate the millions of voters eager to cast their ballot. Among the first to do so, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who was running for vice president. His father ruled with an iron fist for 20 years. There are 18,000 electoral seats being contested, but it's the race for president that has many Filipinos on edge. It's been the most acrimonious and divisive campaign since democracy was restored 30 years ago. Opinion polls suggest a controversial former mayor from the southern Philippines is leading. Rodrigo Duterte's brash manner and vigilante approach to fighting crime is what supporters say they like most about him.
And you insist on doing drugs, and my orders are, listen to this very carefully. You go out and hunt for them, arrest them. And if they put up a good fight and would refuse to surrender, and if you feel that your life is in jeopardy, shoot.
Duterte promises to shake up the establishment. His lead in the opinion polls so concerned the ruling party that a few days ago, outgoing President Benigno Aquino called for the four other presidential candidates to unite against Duterte for the good of the country. None of the other candidates heeded the call. With a five-way split, whoever becomes president may do so without a clear majority. The Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, has promised transparency, but already the reliability of these automated polls is being called into question. The COMELEC's computer system was hacked just a few weeks ago, and there are fears of widespread cheating. Many areas of the Philippines are dominated by feuding political families who have a reputation for using bribes and coercion to get their way. At least 15 people have been killed in election-related violence in the run-up to the polls. But many Filipinos say they're ready to put differences aside once the results are announced, including presidential candidates.
We need to be able to accept what the majority wants.
We are already suffering from poverty. There's no point in arguing with each other.
It will be a while before the official winners are declared. Until then, citizens groups will remain vigilant and security forces are on high alert. Margot Ortigas, Al Jazeera, Manila.
Let's take a closer look at the main candidates and their policies. Vice President Jojomar Binay is promising free education and healthcare if elected. He's also battling corruption allegations. Former Cabinet Minister Mar Rojas has the backing of the outgoing President Benigno Aquino. He's promised to address poverty, but he's been criticised for his handling of recovery efforts following Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. Leading the polls is Rodrigo Duterte, former mayor of the southern city of Davao for 22 years. He's promising to wipe out corruption and drug dealing within 6 months and is challenging China's claim to disputed territory in the South China Sea. Well, Duterte does appear to be taking a strong early lead in unofficial results, so let's talk more about him and where the Philippines as a country is headed with our guests today. Joining us from Manila, we have Marites Vitug, editor-at-large of the social news network Rappler. In Singapore, John Fasman, Southeast Asia Bureau Chief for The Economist. And also in Manila via Skype, Lisandro Claudio, Research Associate with the Institute of Philippine Culture at Ateneo de Manila University. Welcome to all of you. It's a big day there in the Philippines. The man of the moment does appear to be Rodrigo Duterte. Marites, what is it that makes him so popular?
He has tapped into a into the sentiment, an anti-establishment sentiment. Because of our economic growth, our expectations have risen, and we have become impatient. We want to share with the benefits, yet many are not sharing with the benefits. So Duterte comes and campaigns and says he will fix our problems quickly. 3 to 6 months, he will curb criminality, and then he says he will get rid of drugs, and then he will fight corruption, and then he'll provide for the poor. That's really there's a very tough things to do, but because of his brash manner and his show force, people believe that he will be able to do all this within his term.
Lisandro, is this popularity spread across the social spectrum?
Yeah, this is what I wanted to add to Marites' comments, that there are many people, particularly in Manila, from the upper echelons of society who are voting for Duterte because of the law and order policy. But that combines with almost like a majority of Mindanao. It has to be noted that that if he becomes president, he will be the first president from the south of the Philippines, Mindanao, which is the poorest part of the Philippines, which is the most underrepresented part of the Philippines. So not only so you have two mutually incomprehensible constituents here. In Manila, the law and order vote. In the south, the southern representation vote.
John, why has this vote become such a huge outpouring of emotion against establishment politics there in the Philippines?
Well, I think your previous two guests were exactly right, that you have these two constituencies that he's really perfectly prepared to appeal to. One is the Metro Manila constituency, who likes his Davao record. They think he will fix a broken system, he'll fix a broken city, he'll get Manila up and working again. And the other is, remember, he is a Visayan who has had his entire career in Mindanao, so he's perfectly well positioned to capture the sort of resentment that's always simmering below the surface at Imperial Manila.
Of course, the big question, John, is whether he can live up to these very high expectations.
Well, I think that's going to be very difficult. The truth is, however people are feeling about traditional politicians, for the past 5 years, no major Asian economy has grown faster since the Philippines. And so what you really have in this election is the tale of two countries. You've got the sort of fast-growing top-line numbers where you have a sort of robust economy. If you're looking at it from the outside, it looks like the country is growing very quickly and evenly. But the same share of the population lives in poverty now as did when Mr. Aquino took office. So the question is, will Mr. Duterte be able to live up to these expectations, and will he sort of reorient Philippine growth so it's more inclusive, so it trickles down to people who may not have shared in this recent economic boom?
Marites, what's your reading on that? Because, of course, there are a large number of investors who are concerned over Duterte's lack of economic experience.
Mr. Duterte has not really spoken about policy and platform. He has given us talking points on his action, what he's going to do. So we are awaiting who will he name as members of his cabinet. During the campaign, he has not mentioned any of his economic advisors. Even the business community is waiting for him to announce who these people are. But he has not given any names, and even when he spoke to a major business group, the Makati Business Club, instead of reading a prepared speech with his supposedly prepared economic platform, he joked about Viagra and women, and spoke again about law and order. That's his favorite subject.
Yeah, I mean, we will return, I think, to the economy in just a moment because it is an interesting issue to explore. But you mentioned those comments there. So I just want to say, as an outsider, those sorts of comments about rape, extrajudicial killings, about even sort of suspending Congress, I mean, that sounds like he's an absolute liability.
That is very scary. That's keeping us anxious because he has repeatedly said that he will shut down Congress if they get in his way. He even said, he addressed the Ombudsman, our top anti-corruption advocate. he said that to get out of his way in his fight against criminality, because he wants the police to be free in going after criminals, and he will issue them pardons so that they will not be arrested for human rights violations. What is at stake here is all the democratic gains that we worked hard since Marcos was deposed in 1986. So the big question is, will these democratic gains be eroded or strengthened under Duterte?
Lisandro, what do you think of that? With this kind of fighting talk, why are people more concerned about their democracy?
So what I've been doing recently is I've been talking to local journalists who have covered Duterte's career as mayor, and I asked them, what's up with all this bluster? And they said that's precisely what it is. It's bluster. It's nothing more than that, and that's why they're not too concerned about it. Of course, from our perspective, people in Manila or people abroad who don't know the dynamics of local politics in Mindanao and the bluster of the rhetoric there, it's all pretty shocking to us. But for many of the local journalists in Davao in particular, they say, that's how the mayor talks. That's not necessarily what he's going to do. I realize that's a very, that's not a source of much comfort, but that's all really we can hang on to these days.
Well, John, what do you think of that? Is this just bluster? Because if we actually look at Duterte's track record as mayor down in Davao City, we've got Human Rights Watch saying that there have been some 1,000 suspected criminals killed in an extrajudicial way. So perhaps it is more than bluster.
Yeah, it's clearly not just bluster. I mean, there's a fair amount of bluster. I don't think anybody believes he's actually going to kill 100,000 criminals and dump their bodies in Manila Bay. But he says this as though it's a good thing to do. And his bluster puts us in the position of believing that the best possible thing that one could say about Duterte is that he doesn't mean what he says. I mean, that's not a good way to come into office. And as you say, Human Rights Watch has linked him fairly convincingly with Davao death squads, with extrajudicial killings. Certainly, Ms. Vitug mentioned the speech he made at Makati Business Club. I was there in the audience, and he said that he made some really noxious statements about how displaying the executed bodies of suspected criminals was a good way to deter criminality. So there is a fair amount of bluster mixed in there, but if you look at his record, it's not all bluster.
And Lisandro, I mean, are people so fed up with crime and corruption, that they're willing to look the other way just to see to see the job be done?
Well, actually, this is the weird thing. Criminality has not necessarily risen in the last few years. Neither has corruption. What this has been really a systematic collapse of a belief in a democratic system that I don't know if I want to use the term engineered, but it's been creeping up very slowly. So you have, for example, a lot of blogs that are quite right of center, that are critical of democratic institutions. You have that on social media also and on YouTube. And a lot of us in the initial phase of the Aquino period, we thought it was nothing. We thought it was just a fringe. But now we're actually confronting it. And I don't think people who had a bias for democracy had enough foresight to sort of take this phenomenon more seriously.
Marites, you mentioned just a little earlier fear of an erosion of democracy there in the Philippines. Let's take a look at the potential vice president, because he's an equally interesting choice. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of a notorious dictator. What might a Duterte Marcos government look like?
It will be actually a Duterte Marcos government will send a very strong message that authoritarianism is creeping back into the country. But the saddest thing about having Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as vice president is that it shows that we as a people have very short memories and that we don't remember what happened during martial law. And what's interesting is the biggest group that supported Ferdinand Marcos Jr. are not the millennials. They are the 55-year-olds and above who have been or are disillusioned with the return of democracy and found maybe the process too slow and inefficient. And now we suddenly are looking back and pining for the days of martial law. And I think we're not alone, as we're seeing in Brazil and in Peru. So I don't know if this is it crosses borders, but I think we're not alone.
John, what's all that about? What is this pining, as Marites says, for the bad times, really, for martial law, for the time when there was torture, when billions of dollars were plundered? Do people really have that short a memory?
Well, I think there are two things at play here. The first is that the Philippines is a very young country. I think the median age is somewhere in the late 20s, which means that most people weren't alive during Marcos's era. But as Ms. Vitug says, he's getting a lot of support from older people, and that's the more worrying trend. You mentioned Donald Trump. I think the distressing comparison between him and Trump is that what they both say is, look, the system's broken, I'm going to fix it. Don't worry about how I'm going to fix it, I'm just going to fix it. You know, democratic processes and legal norms are not sexy, and they're often frustrating, and they often slow things down, and checks and balances make things not work as well as you want them to. On the other hand, if you are opposed to something, they put those balances in there to keep sort of one man from just imposing his will on the people. And what people have both done in the Philippines, and we're seeing in the Republican race now, is put their faith in someone who says, don't worry about process, don't worry about democracy, don't worry about legality, I'm just going to get things done and I'll get them done for you. A lot of really bad presidencies, a lot of really bad leaders have taken power with exactly that promise.
Lisandro, let's take a look at those checks and balances that are in place to stop one man becoming, again, a dictator. How strong do you think the Philippines' democratic institutions are? Should they want to counter Duterte's bid, perhaps, to expand his powers?
Well, the system is going to be tested, but I offer two things that may be of comfort to some people. Number one, this is a post-Marcos constitution that explicitly makes it difficult for a president to implement martial law precisely because of the experiences of the Marcos years. This is the legacy of Corazon Aquino. And secondly, I've been looking at the Senate results, and it seems as if Mr. Aquino's, or the current President Aquino's Liberal Party, looks like it's set to control the upper house of the legislature. And also, if you look at the Supreme Court is still more or less a combination of appointees from the Arroyo government and the Aquino government. So the vestiges of democracy under the Aquino government are still there. Whether or not these will hold up to these challenges is, of course, the big question. But there is some comfort there.
Marites, what do you think? Will democratic institutions hold fast?
You know that the new president, Duterte, will appoint 10 Supreme Court justices during his term. There will be 10 vacancies, and that worries me. Well, that worries a lot of people, because the Supreme Court is, the last, maybe not the last frontier, but it's really a strong institution that can provide checks and balance. So that is worrisome. But as Lisandro said, it will be very difficult to just declare martial law, because you will need a 2/3 vote of Congress. And I don't think that after we've experienced democracy, especially in the last 6 years under President Aquino, it will be very difficult to do that. So I'm not very pessimistic about this.
Okay, something else that really sparked my interest earlier. We saw Duterte going on television on Monday, speaking already like he was president, urging police and military to respect the election process and the Constitution. Marites, has there been suggestions or rumours in the Philippines of a military coup should he get voted into power?
I think that they just remain rumors, but the military, like civilian society, is divided. There are a number of officers and soldiers who support him, but there are those who don't, because he reportedly, and I think this has been confirmed, he reportedly pays revolutionary taxes to the New People's Army, which is the military arm of the Communist Party. So we have a divided military as well as a divided civilian society. It will be very difficult, I think, to launch a coup in this condition.
Okay. John, just to go back to the economy, because that, of course, is a huge issue. Aquino has done quite a lot of good work with the economy. Again, Duterte came on television saying that he would ease restrictions on foreign ownership of industries. Is that something that can calm investor fears?
I think it is. I think we have seen in the past few weeks, the stock market has gone down and the peso has taken a tumble. There is always, at the time of elections, a fair amount of jitteriness in the markets. As far as I know, or as far as my reporting has told me, no one is planning to pull out. Expansion is going on as planned. But I think related to this is a point I'd like to return to from the discussion we just had about imposing martial law. There's a secondary risk, and that is that with the Liberal Party in control of Congress and the Supreme Court, that you enter a period of politically driven instability. And what that means is I could see a scenario in which Duterte gets impeached for something in 2 years, 3 years, as President Estrada did in the earlier part of this century. And so you have, I think that risk is increased if Lenny Robredo, the Liberal Party candidate, does well as vice president. So you enter this period where you have sort of political internecine warfare, and a fair segment of the population, the people who voted for Duterte, feel that their votes were not respected, and so you risk a sort of Thailand-style standoff, where you have a populist candidate who was a tribune for a lot of people who felt left out from the recent economic boom, who voted against an elite, and an elite that fights back. And so you have this period of instability and stagnation right at a point where I think structurally the Philippine economy is set to be the strongest in Asia. You have a very young country, you have a cheap labor force, people speak English, education is improving, policy is broadly on the right track. You can't say that about Thailand or Indonesia. And so this instability threatens to knock the Philippines off what looks like a very promising course for it.
Sorry, not Duterte, Lisandro, do you have the same reading on Duterte leadership, that it will potentially lead to instability?
Well, this is the first president we've had who is potentially impeachable on day zero. So on the last week of campaign, corruption allegations came out against him. And these allegations were brought forth by a notorious senator who was a former coup plotter. And he says this person is corrupt, and I can prove that the rabbit hole goes very, very deep. And then when asked by the media, what do you intend to do about it? He said, well, I want to make the Filipino people realize that they've made a mistake. And what happens afterwards, he says, is anyone's ball game. So there are already threats, and there are already a couple of officers within the military who are very concerned about Duterte's close connections with the Communist Party of the Philippines. So for instance, just last week on social media, there was a Skype conversation between him and the chairman of the Communist Party of the Philippines that spread like wildfire. And I think this is spooking certain segments of the military. So you have a divided military, you have a divided public. I don't think it's going to be as bad as Thailand because you don't have the royal institution there in the Philippines. That is another source of division, but definitely those cleavages are there.
Okay. Marites, we are running out of time a little bit. I just want to turn to the international scene, because in the run-up to this vote, Duterte has been very abrasive on that front, threatening to sever ties with Australia and with the US. What would his foreign policy look like?
You know that Duterte's website uploaded just a few days ago his platform. And under foreign policy, there's only one item. It says, pursue arbitration case on China. So that's the only foreign policy issue on his platform. So we really have no idea what he's going to do, whom he's going to appoint as Foreign Affairs Secretary. And we must remember that he's going to be a minority president if he wins, let's say, 33% of the votes. So he has to unify the country first, and that was what he said today. He's starting to try to sound presidential, calling for unity. But really, we need to know his foreign policy thoughts, because up to now, he just spoke about China and has so far offended 3 countries.
Okay, John, just very quickly, he's being compared to the US presidential hopeful Donald Trump, but he's no fan of Trump himself, is he?
No, he's not, but it's an apt comparison. I mean, they're both rough-talking populists, and they both have this gift that I think other politicians probably envy, which is that they are ungaffable. They cannot say anything to be used against them. Other politicians, if they had said the sorts of things that Duterte or Trump had said, would find themselves in enormous trouble, but they have they have Teflon skins.
Fascinating discussion that we've had today. It's going to be so interesting to see how events turn out in the Philippines. Thanks so much to all our guests for joining us. Marites Vitug, John Fasman and Lisandro Claudio. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.